Throughout history, there have been countless unexplainable stories, events, and moments captured on audio. These horrifying tapes were archived, never to be heard again. Until now. These are the tapes of trepidation. Tape number 19. Summer in the Country. It was the summer of 1993. I distinctly remember it was early summer, because I had just finished building my son's treehouse in the back paddock, and it was hot as hell out there. We had lived on a farm at the time, so we had plenty of space for it and more. I never understood why some other families would up and move to the city, what with all the freedom there was out in the fields. Everyone always knew one another, and you always knew who was or wasn't trustworthy. It was the sort of place you were bound to raise a family, you know? Anyway, there was a lot of hubbub that year about some big thing that had happened around the time. My neighbor, Mark, had been wounded while out hunting, and swore up and down that it was something big that had done it. Now this is out in the country, mind you. So there was a good bit of woods between my neighbor and I. And while it was good for hunting, I didn't hold much stock in the idea that something big could fit in there. Biggest we ever saw was deer, and they didn't seem like the sort of animal to give Mark no injuries like what he had. Mark was a trustworthy sort though, so I figured he believed it at least. Some of the less skeptical of the locals on our road had banded together into a sort of hunting group, I guess, to go into the woods. They likely figured it was a boar or something of that nature, and they might be able to get something for catching it. When they'd approached me about it, I'd wished them luck but decided to stick where I was. My late wife Anna wouldn't much like it if I wasn't keeping an eye on our son, I said. God rest her soul. They accepted that reasoning and moved on, and I did just like I said. Now, my son has always had an active imagination, so I didn't think much of it when he told me he'd seen something in the woods out by his treehouse. I'd gone to do some work, you see, and he was old enough to be by himself for a few minutes. I figured if he was up in his treehouse, there wasn't much wrong that could happen out there, you know? There weren't no animals out there that could climb that high and be anything approaching dangerous. And like I said, I knew everyone that lived out there. So he comes to me and tells me about something that he saw out there. Said it had scared him right good. And he'd come straight to me about it, because he didn't much like the idea of being out there alone anymore. Now, I was glad he'd come to me as soon as he was scared. But I made sure to tell him he'd likely been safer to stay up in the treehouse if there was any sort of animal snooping around. I let him stay with me until I was done feeding the animals, and then we went back out to see what the trouble was. I'd taken my old shotgun just in case, but just like I thought, there wasn't anything out there. Nothing that would cause much trouble anyway. So I just smiled to my boy and told him things looked safe enough to be out here. He still seemed a bit shaken, so I made sure to stay up there with him this time until he was tired of it. Worst came to worst, I felt sure I'd be able to deal with any animal that came wandering up, especially being safe in the treehouse and all. About an hour later, he looks out the window and freezes up. He grabs me and points into the woods, and by the look on his face, I was expecting him to yell, but he was quiet. Just as quiet as a little boy can be. "Pop," he whispered to me. "It's here again." Now I was tense, mind you, but I still figured it was something simple he just wasn't looking at with the knowledge I'd had. Some regular animal, or maybe one of the hunting group was lurking out there in the tree spooking him, and I'd have to have a talk with somebody. That's not what I saw when I looked out the window. I'll try to describe what I saw as best I can manage, but I'm not sure if I know how. This thing with long, slick dark hair was creeping through the trees a little ways off. I call it a thing, because it sure as hell wasn't no man or animal. The best I can describe it is looking like someone who had broken their arms and legs but kept crawling anyhow, like its joints were all wrong. But it couldn't have been a man, because it was twice as big as any man I knew, and moved in a way that no man with limbs ever could. I was only looking at it for a few seconds, still trying to disbelieve what I was seeing, when I saw it look up to the window. Its eyes were dark, beady little things, barely there at all, and they met mine almost exactly. My blood was ice, and I couldn't even describe how sick a feeling I got in my belly looking into those eyes. It cocked its head, and barely a second later, it slowly raised up a gnarled hand. I swear to you on God Almighty, it waved. Something about this snapped me right out of it, and I grabbed my shotgun. But by the time I'd found and named it out the window, the thing was gone. I'm telling you, there's no way anything that big could have moved so far, so fast, without making as much as a noise. I grabbed my son and we got the hell out of there. I still can't explain what it is that we saw that day, because I never saw nor heard of it again. But I know one thing for certain, and that's this. I don't know why most folks leave for the city, but I know why we did. This has been tape number 19, Summer in the Country, by the Tapes of Trepidation Horror Narration Podcast. Summer in the Country was written by an anonymous author and was originally posted on the CreepyPasta Wiki. Narration, production, and sound design for this episode was by TJ Hodder. The Tapes of Trepidation theme was written by the incredible J.M. Sheriff. All logos, banners, overlays, and graphic design work was provided by the talented Jason Reese from Jaybird Digital Arts. If you have a story you would like to submit or a question regarding the show, please contact us at tapesoftrepidation@gmail.com. Support the show by subscribing and leaving a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, your favorite podcatcher, or subscribe and leave us a like on YouTube. Be sure to tell your friends. Word of mouth is extremely helpful to a new podcast like this one. Check us out on social media through the link tree in the show notes. We have Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Especially if you're on Discord. Come hang out with us. We have a lot of fun. If you'd like to support the show a little more, consider joining the Tapes of Trepidation Patreon, where for as little as $5 a month, you can gain access to monthly bonus short story narrations, the weekly behind-the-scenes podcast within the archive, and more. Come, join us, and become trapped within the archive. Just like my current patrons, Kelly Sisson, Neil Skarupa of Neurotic Voice, Doozer Pindon, Ronan Kumori, Eric Phones, and Patrick Stewart. Thank you all so much for the support. It truly means the world to me. All content used on Tapes of Trepidation is either original, used with permission, or is available on your Creative Commons share-alike license. All rights reserved, unless otherwise stated. This podcast and its content may not be redistributed or rebroadcasted without the express written consent of Tapes of Trepidation and the story's author. Thank you so much for listening.